Welcome, everyone, to All Aces on Air. I am excited as usual, but I am especially excited today because I am hosting a wonderful person who is a colleague, who is a friend, and has a lot to offer with her expertise. And that is the wonderful Dr. Jennie Stevens. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jennie Stevens. And just for context for folks, before we have Dr. Stevens, which I am going to call her Jennie afterwards. But for this part, I want to call her Dr. Stevens because I'm about to say a couple of things that are really about her contributions through her book, Diversifying Power, which is an amazing contribution that helps us to better understand, number one, why it's so important that we have diversity within climate change, within the energy space. And when we say diversity, she really focuses on this intersection between feminism or looking at anti-sexism work, also at the intersection of anti-racism or racial equity work. And so for today's conversation, we're really going to get into what are the parts of her journey that are really important to her in being able to arrive at some of the lessons that she has learned in promising practices, as well as the book and some of the specific content. So without further ado, welcome, Jennie. It is such a pleasure to have you. And as I warned, I'm going to ask you, what is the most important thing that you feel like the audience needs to know about you?
Well, thank you so much, Atyia. Great to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you. I think one of the things that kind of just to share a little bit of where I'm coming from is I've always been focused on and committed to thinking about the environment and from a social perspective, and thinking about how our communities and are reliant on and connected with the environment. And in my own kind of journey, I started out focusing, and I was kind of trained with a science and engineering background, thinking about environmental issues from that perspective. And what I've learned throughout my career, and I've been working on climate and energy issues for my whole career now, probably 20, 25 years. And really recognizing that the focus on technology and science has excluded so many ideas, so many people, so many priorities, and we've missed opportunities for recognizing the potential of prioritizing social innovation as well as technological innovation. Like, technology is important, of course, and we also really have been missing a lot of opportunities to think about social innovation. And when we don't think as much about the social, we also miss opportunities to consider social justice and racial justice and economic justice, and how a lot of our attempts to address environmental issues, climate, moving away from fossil fuels toward more renewable energy, we have some of those initiatives actually make some of the social justice and equity issues worse. And that's a real problem that we need to move away from, that very technocratic way of thinking, and really think about investments and investing in our communities and our organizations so that we can align our priorities as we address the climate crisis, and not in exclusion of everything else. So that's kind of like one of the core messages of my work, and how I've really kind of synthesized my different experiences, which have been mostly, as I mentioned, a lot of my training and my work has been in this academic space, which is also very kind of white male dominated.
Yeah.
And so I've been just really kind of grappling with what we're missing, right? By not having more inclusive discourse and engaged different ways of participatory processes that bring in what people and are really need to focus on and are priorities for people.
Yes, and thank you for that, because I think, from a content perspective, right, it's really important that we thread the needle through all of these different places. One thing I want to do, which is a slight departure, is my cousin is watching on LinkedIn. And so I want to acknowledge Jessie Bland. Hey, cuz, good to see you. And I want to acknowledge Monique the rapper, who is asking if we can see what she types. And the answer is yes, Monique, we can see what you type. All of that said, I really want to also highlight a couple of things about your background that I didn't cover in the intro, because I really wanted to get into the conversation, and Atyia can talk. So that said, you are the director of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs and the Dean's Professor of Sustainability, Science, and Policy at Northeastern University. That's a lot. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I am a professor, and I teach, and I also am very involved in really thinking about how universities and our educational system can connect with and contribute to society in more ways than, in addition to the students that we train, right? And students, but also thinking about how the research that gets done and kind of this research to practice, knowledge to action link. So I'm, and I think that also connects with my experiences, as I mentioned, kind of going from kind of more science and engineering background to where I am now in the School of Public Policy, which is very focused on how to integrate the knowledge and the research into action, right? Through our policies, through engagement with communities, and so that's where it's a good space for me to be, because it provides a lot of opportunities to connect with all kinds of people, including you and so many others that I get to collaborate with. So I'm very collaborative, actually. That's a very important thing. And a lot of academics aren't as collaborative, I think, because part of what being a professor often means is being an expert in something. And when you're an expert, sometimes you're expected to just kind of keep getting narrow and say you're only an expert in this, but therefore you don't talk about other things. And I've never been that way. Like I really think broadly and really I'm learning all the time through my collaborations with different people. And so I think that's an important piece of how I've been, where I am with my job and connecting in that way. So the book that you mentioned is not a conventional kind of academic book. It's really a call to action, and it's really intended to be inspirational. It's really about examples of all kinds of leaders who are not having the narrow technocratic approach to climate and energy that a lot of climate and energy experts are embracing, but really people who are connecting climate and energy directly to jobs and economic justice, to our health, to food, to housing, to transportation, to the core issues that are most important to people and families and communities. And that's where chapter 1 in the book is actually called Growing the Squad. And the squad, as people may know, refers to 4 junior congresswomen, including our own Ayanna Pressley, who represents us in DC, who they have come on the national stage in the past couple of years and really changed the discourse on climate and energy policy, because they have been able to connect climate and energy with jobs and economic justice, in the discussions about the Green New Deal, with criminal justice and systemic racism, and with the need for investments in public housing, right? We have a housing crisis, and we often don't acknowledge that in the national discourse, and the opportunities for connecting that with thinking about energy, because the built environment is so much of the such a big part of the energy we use. So investments in housing, which are so desperately needed, is an opportunity to advance clean and renewable and efficient energy.
So for folks who have not realized it, so Jenny's a woman, right? And as a woman, right, within a society that is has been taught a lot of things that are not explicitly about women and our roles and who we are supposed to be or not supposed to be, but that reinforces those ideas, which means that as part of this system we keep talking about, usually here at All Aces, we're laser being focused on racial equity, which we're going to come to. But in this context of being a woman in this work, in this society, writing this book, what has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, so I've been working a lot on energy issues, like thinking about moving away from fossil fuels toward renewable energy. And one of the things that has happened to me, experiences that I've had, repeatedly, is kind of going to energy conferences where there could be 200 or 300 people in the room, and only 5 or 6 of us are women, right? So we see each other across the room. We might have lunch together, I've met friends and colleagues that in that context. And when we talk, one of the things we have realized, or are part of some of those conversations have realized, is that we bring a different experience and a different set of priorities and different perceptions of risk and what's important to those conversations, to those energy conferences, right? That are predominantly white men. And one of the things that I've learned through my experiences is also that when women, people of color, indigenous folks, and other people who have been excluded historically, right, from leadership positions or specific sectors or specific kinds of opportunities, when we're given the opportunity and we show up in those spaces, we bring different priorities, different life experiences, different perceptions of risk, and are able to, we have different capacity, therefore, to see some of the social justice issues or the structural racism, the gender bias issues, the than the people who've been there all along and not kind of been noticing these issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is really something that is an opportunity for all of us, no matter what our gender or our race or our religion is, to acknowledge and recognize and embrace the reality of those systemic obstacles. And we have to be constantly and vigilantly assessing and reassessing what we're doing, our practices, our processes, our policies, so that we're not reinforcing and perpetuating, but are rather disrupting and redistributing power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in ways that are reducing inequities and disparities by centering social justice, rather than pretending that there are no problems there, which end up perpetuating and exacerbating the inequities. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so. Before I say what I'm going to say, I'm going to do this. So number one, I want to say shout out to HG for posting, for watching. Thank you. And we see you in the energy space trying to do your part to diversify and to bring up the hard issues that a lot of people don't want to be talking about. And thank you for having me as part of one of your sessions with your group. And I also want to acknowledge Ben Cares. It's good to see you, sir. And we are very excited to be here together, and glad that you're here joining us. And so this idea of why it's important to do this, right? From a, one of the framings you used was, if we want to have outcomes that are just, that we have to be thinking about these issues from the beginning, right? And this gets to a larger piece, which is, I'm just going to say it plainly, do we want to win, right? Like, do we want to actually accomplish these big goals for our country, for our communities? And if we want to do that well, then we have to acknowledge that there's a diversity of people out here, right? And that there is no one monolithic group. And yes, race and racism are realities. Racism, I'll say, is a reality that disproportionately marginalizes people of color, or I should say marginalizes people of color, and disproportionately places the burden of climate change and the potential burdens of what it means to shift to these new energy ways of being, because you see also the lack of a benefits analysis and burdens analysis, right? To be with this lens of social justice. All of that to say, as we think about how we move forward and how we incorporate more women, more people of color into the field, into processes as decision makers to help bring that lens and that context. What kind of preparation do women and people of color need? And then what the second question is going to be, which is, in what kind of preparation do organizations need to be able to do the reception part well in terms of equity and inclusion? So I'm going to start with, what is it that we need to be doing as people of color and as women to prepare to enter into these spaces from your experience?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a two-way answer here, because there's things that we can do to enter into those spaces, and there's so many things that the people who are already in those spaces need to do to help to be more inclusive, right? So it's both, and I think what I find so powerful about the connection is making the connections that climate and energy are connected to everything that we actually wake up every day worrying about, right? Like that's what we've missed with this technocratic lens when people talk about greenhouse gas accounting and carbon pricing and green, even it's just very technocratic. It's not what we like talk about in our families, in our communities. It's not our they're kind of abstract theoretical kind of concept. So what I think the powerful connections are for us to connect that with the opportunities for jobs and job creation and economic development in our communities, right? And the power of renewable energy, and I guess it's getting a little bit nerding out a little on energy, but there's this idea of energy democracy, which is acknowledging that if we move away from fossil fuels, so fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel interests have had so much power over our political system and over our culture, with these conservative values and also really concentrating wealth and power and kind of exploitative, right, of so many workers and communities, and Black and brown communities have been disproportionately impacted by fossil fuel infrastructure and fossil fuel transportation and refining and all of that. And when we move away and we envision this renewable-based future that really could be distributed, we can distribute the power literally and figuratively, because every community, every place on Earth actually has access to renewable energy, not just wind and solar, but places like Boston on the coast could have wave and tidal energy, and they could also have offshore wind, which has a lot of potential. Inland communities could have solar and wind, but also like geothermal energy, which is a whole energy source from the Earth's center of the Earth that we could harness, but which we haven't really invested in. So, and when what's transformative about that is that the renewable energy is actually renewable in that it's abundant, it's plentiful, it is perpetual, it's actually really reliable, and it's free once you've figured out how to harness it. So that's what's transformative about it. And in a lot of our conversations about climate energy, that gets missed. And so it allows for local and community and regional appropriate mix of these technologies, but then also the local and regional control and ownership and local, keeping the profits and the benefits and local, which is a huge additional piece. So I mentioned that because I think we need diversity of perspectives and experiences to enable to kind of bring forth that vision to reality, because the conventional thinking isn't going there, right? And we need to ground this work in what do our communities need? How can we be less reliant on these big corporate interests, right? How can we bring the economic benefits and keep the economic benefits local and regional? And so that's a little bit tangent from your original question, but I think it's an important piece of how we can we need to open up this space and make connections, right? And not keep it as like a separate issue, because it really isn't. And I think that's where people who may not yet have considered themselves in this space or prioritizing climate and energy work, it's an opportunity to connect. And that's also where I get so inspired, because I see the youth movement, and I see the movement for Black Lives, and I see these new coalitions of advocates and activists who are recognizing that the cause or the root of these challenges are interconnected, and we have to recognize those linkages and integrate that into our vision of where we want to go, and how we want to proceed now as a way toward a bigger kind of transformation, toward a more prosperous and sustainable future for all, not just for some.
Thank you for that. And I think, to your point around the question of kind of how do, people of color and women prepare themselves to be involved in these spaces. One of the things we talk a lot about at All ACEs is kind of power and agency, right? And what's in our circle of influence, both in terms of what we have direct control over, and the things that we can have impact on, can influence. And movements are a big part of that. And what I've learned from, my work in community is that there's a lot that we who are on the receiving end of oppression have to unlearn and undo so that we don't replicate the same patterns of thinking and behavior. And there's a lot that many of us have learned along the way because we did some research, we did some study, we did internal looks at ourselves to be able to show up in all types of spaces healthy, right? To be able to manage ourselves. And it's not a destination, it's a constant journey because, depending on stress levels and depending on whatever is going on, it's easier to just coast and go along with things. It's harder to really be present in moments and really notice when things are out of sorts and have language and to be able to talk about it in ways that people can hear you. And so as I think about part of the opportunities that we have in the space, in addition to those pieces of understanding oppression and what it is and how it works and building our own power, which there's different types of power. We've been talking up to this point about power over, right? Traditional forms of power. I'm excited about the work we do internally with ourselves as part of the team, and then with organizations in that space of owning our power, in that we as people of color in particular in our focus areas, but people who are on the receiving end of oppression really do actually have a lot of power. It's invisible power that we actually have to tap into, which means learning a lot. And in the space of energy, what are some of the things that you think it's important for people to really be paying attention to? So you listed, understanding that renewable energy can be a transformative opportunity, right? Because of all of the kind of processes that you described, that having the diverse voices at the table help us to be able to see different perspectives. And then I just brought into the conversation, and in order to be in these conversations as women, as people of color, there's certain work that we have to do. And then I want to get to these organizations and institutions and policymakers and all of the different folks who are really driving the train on all of this. What is it that they need to do differently to have equity and to be inclusive with all of these different voices that need to be informing where this train goes?
Yeah, so I really like the framing of unlearning. And I think there needs to be unlearning on so many levels by so many people, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's including the, white male scientists or also need to unlearn what they have been taught their whole lives, or like their life experience and many people genuinely don't realize how, especially in science, I think, and in people think science is somehow absolute or unbiased, or you know what I mean, like, and
it's objective
exactly, and people, they really don't see how science and the scientific process and the education system kind of around science continues to be very exclusive and a part of this bigger systems of oppression and unequal power dynamics and all of that. So I think that this notion of unlearning, like there's so much unlearning that needs to be done regarding racism, sexism, and so many conventional norms, right? That people, and as you mentioned, you know, how hard it is, right? It's so much easier for any of us to just go along like, oh, this is the way it is, right? And that's what most people, you know, we all do to some degree, right? In different levels and different times. And it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of commitment, like a deep commitment, to be able to bring that courage to the table or to the meeting or to the whatever kind of interaction. And so and so that's why that's what makes it so hard for people to even imagine what a deeper systemic change looks like, right? And one of the things that I have been thinking about during this time of the pandemic that we're in, you know, everything, it's a very disruptive time, right? We're all doing things and living our lives in ways that we had no idea, we didn't really imagine a few months ago, or I guess now it's like 9 or 10 months ago. It's been going on a while, and there's so much hardship and suffering and you know, it's just such a hard time for so many people right now. And what has also been happening is kind of a revealing of the depths of some of the economic inequities, the racial disparities in health outcomes, and this extreme concentration of wealth and power among a very few people who are continuing even during this pandemic, when so many people, communities, and families are in such hardship and suffering right now. Some of those, you know, billionaires are continuing to concentrate their wealth and power, right? So
they're making money.
They're making a lot of money right now, and that is, you know, it's just, it's so unsustainable. Like if you look at the graphs of concentration of wealth and power, and like the top 1% is just keep going up and up, and everybody else is going down, and then the racial disparities within that are, you know, even worse. And it's just like, we can't continue this way, right? And so that's where I remain optimistic that the disruption that we're seeing right now, that we're experiencing, first of all, I mean, we need big public investments in our communities to survive, recover, like rebuild, reconfigure, and I think if that's where, you know, it's a call for all of us to stay engaged and use our power to get involved to make sure that those investments in the kind of pandemic recovery are made in such a way that we're investing in the communities that have been underinvested for so long, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we need to make sure we direct whatever the next phase is, to make sure that we use this disruptive moment is leveraged for change and for bigger transformative change, and not just a little, tweak around the edges. Because we're at a point, and this is where, we haven't talked explicitly about the climate crisis, but we are, climate disruptions of all kinds are just getting more and more frequent and intense and disruptive. And we know that the inequities in who's being impacted, and we need to prioritize the investments to help and contribute to elevating the resilience of all of those communities that have been excluded for too long, right? And so
that actually brings up a good point around resilience, because I was holding on to the fact that that you are the director for strategic research collaborations at Northeastern University's Global Resilience Institute, which I'm a distinguished senior fellow, very fancy. And you just said the word resilience, right? And that we need to contribute to the resilience of communities. Now, what most people of color who have been reading about social justice and racial equity and kind of are more aware, immediately in their minds and immediately in my mind, I used to hear, oh, so you basically just want me to learn how to have more grit and be able to roll with the punches better of racism and other in social injustices and any other category of oppression that I fall into. I just need better skills to be able to, be resilient to those things. And I want to use this as an opportunity to help folks better understand the bigger picture of resilience and what it really means, and not how it's used as part of the system of oppression as a weapon against people of color, right? Mm-hmm. So in this broader context of resilience, what are we talking about?
So all of that, like there's so many ways that the word can be used, and it is used, and so sometimes I actually stay away from it too, because it's like, but I think the way I think about it is being prepared for, adapting to, and then learning from disruptions. So there are going to be disruptions. There's disruptions in our lives, for our organizations, for our, our infrastructure can be disrupted. Like resilience can refer to so many different things at different scales. What we really, one critical thing that I think is really important to acknowledge is that when we have, say, a big storm, right? All too often what's happened is people who are higher up on the socioeconomic perspective or spectrum,
hierarchy,
whatever.
I got you.
Are they may have insurance, right? So if their home gets flooded, they may get insurance money and they can actually fix it, and it might actually be better afterward, right? And because of the way a lot of our systems are, people who don't have those resources, if their home gets flooded and they don't have insurance, they are in, dire straits, right? Like they may have to move, they may have to, they may not have a home for a while, right? Till they find someplace else or figure out something else. And so with each disruption, with each big storm, a lot of our current systems are actually exacerbating inequities and disparities because of the way even our response and our preparedness and our adapting to those disruptions are actually making things worse. And that kind of, I mean, it connects back to what I was also alluding to with renewable energy incentives. Some of the policies for renewable energy are the same thing, or even energy efficiency. There are these incentives out there. There's money available to put solar panels on your roof. So it's homeowners who in suburban communities, that single family homes, and they have extra few $1,000s in the bank, and they get the big incentive, and they get the solar panels on their roof, and then they have free electricity. And whereas renters and other folks who don't have that are left out, right? And they don't get those benefits. So this is, again, where it's really important that we acknowledge how so many of our systems and our policies and our processes are deeply inequitable and actually are promoting and reinforcing inequities rather than the other way around. So when you ask about resilience, I see, I appreciate and I understand fully the way that word is interpreted, and my colleague and good friend Shalonda Baker actually has written a piece about anti-resilience, right? Because what we need, we do not want to build back stronger and reinforce the current systems, right? With resilience. What we need is we actually need disruption, right? So that we can restructure things in a more equitable way. And so that's some of the kind of nuance associated with the word resilience. And so I appreciate you asking and having the opportunity to talk that through a little bit.
Thank you for that. And it's interesting because on the resilience front, one thing I'll add, because I actually, before I really nerded out, before I did my master's program and really studied and read about resilience in the breadth of it, right? At the individual level, what it means to be resilient, what it means to be resilient in communities, what it means to be resilient in a city, what we need, across the country to be resilient. And I've found that there's actually a lot of strength and power in what resilience really is, and not in the common way we talk about it, or the way in mainstream media it gets weaponized against oppressed people. And the thing that I appreciate about the concept itself and how it works in real life is that there's resilience in this context of when things happen, right? That you have what you need in order to not just survive, right, but to thrive moving forward, and to really be kind of bounce forward, as they like to say. And when they used to say, when resilience became part of mainstream conversation, it used to be, you want to bounce back, right? Go back to the way things were. You want to build things back just how they were before, because that makes us comfortable. And really, this idea of resilience is about bouncing forward. It's about understanding where we are before, while we're dealing with chaos and drama and trauma, but also, when things aren't as bad, that we're looking at where are we as an individual, as a community, as a city, as a society, where do we want to be, right? What's in our way of getting there? And in a lot of cases, different forms of oppression and other factors are in our way of getting there. But most importantly, what are the things that we need to change so that when we come out on the other end of getting closer to who we want to be, that things are so much better for everyone in that process, right? So as an individual, when I think about my own experiences and this concept of resilience, that there's a lot of, I lived a portion of my life with a lot of invisible power, right? Things I didn't know it was there. I didn't know that when I'm in certain spaces, that really it's up to me to learn language and learn how to navigate in these spaces, and to be able to bring different perspectives. And to your point earlier about having the courage to do that, that there's a level of courage involved in doing that. And it's not just my responsibility as a person of color, as a female, but it's everybody's responsibility to learn these skills, to build the courage, to build the language, to build the racial equity literacy, the social justice literacy, the emotional intelligence, the communication skills, the critical thinking skills, the conflict management skills, all of these different things that contribute to our ability to reimagine and equitably implement approaches that are going to help us actually achieve that ultimate goal of being better as individuals, being better as communities, being better as cities, as a country. And so when I think about what you said earlier about systems change, that all of this is really about systems change, and that the research on transformative resilience really talks a lot about systems change. And you went through it in the context of renewable energy, right? The types, there's this whole shifting in thinking that needs to happen because, we can't, it's been overused, but it is overused because it is too true, which is you can't solve problems using the same thinking that created them, right? So we have to start with reimagining, and which means unlearning and learning some different ways of being. And then figuring out what are our options, what full options, not just what we can think of in the moment because we're rushing and we have all this sense of urgency, some of it false, most of it false, some of it true, to be able to arrive at a place where we can develop the kinds of strategies and approaches that work. All of that to say, there's this process of systems change that we, excuse me, that we've learned about, that we've seen in research, on the research side. In regular life, we've seen it in movements, we've seen it in communities at these micro scales, but most people haven't actually seen what system change can be, what it looks like, what it feels like. And I don't want to kind of end the show with saying, okay, solve the world's problems. How do we change the whole system within this context of energy? But I did want to explicitly kind of call that out as a thread throughout our conversation around this shift in thinking, the shift in tools and process that we need to have in place in reality. And as we wrap up and as we begin to close the door on this conversation, which time flew, I do want to acknowledge a couple of folks. So Naniqua Blanding said, thank you for your leadership and commitment in this. Yes, this work is a learning journey, and it requires us all to tap into our power, both seen and unseen, to create change. And if you don't know who Naniqua Blanding is, she is an amazing human being who is a vice president at Health Resources in Action in Boston, doing amazing work to do at this intersection of kind of research and community, and looking forward to reconnecting, because we're supposed to get back together again, Naniqua. And then Pallavi, I hope I'm saying your name right, Pallavi, or Payavi. I'm not sure which language to anchor my pronunciation in, said she loves the unpacking of the social and racial resilience in the context of climate adaptation and vulnerabilities. Kristen, hey, it's Kristen Handricken, who is over at Boston University now. Congratulations. And she's not new anymore, but she's hopefully getting settled into her role. It's a pleasure to see you, ma'am. We also have, okay, don't get mad at me, but I'm gonna go for the pronunciation here. Adesuwa. Adesuwa says, love the conversational resilience and ways to bounce forward. So all of that to land us here. I want to end on a not as heavy a note, and just say, you spent time writing a book. Many of us have not had that privilege of going through that process. What would you like to share about the process of writing the book Diversifying Power?
So I think it's a book about leadership, and the idea is not only to focus on political leaders, although some examples are from political leadership, but really to kind of back to what we're talking about in this conversation of acknowledging we are all leaders, right? In our own way. We're leaders in our communities, in our families, in our organizations, and we all can act to inspire others to be leaders, right? And have the courage to speak our truths, speak truth to power, be engaged and genuine and authentic in our work and in our interactions with everyone that we engage with. So I think in writing this book, the hardest part was actually figuring out and deciding which examples and which leaders to elevate. So, I have a whole chapter on courageous leaders who are resisting the polluter elite. So actually challenging these fossil fuel interests who have so much power, including Jackie Patterson of the NAACP. She runs the Environmental and Climate Justice Program, and they've done amazing.
Love Jackie. Yeah, we love you, Jackie.
They've done such amazing work. Calling out the manipulation of Black communities in particular with the fossil fuel interests. And then other leaders like Maura Healey, here, our Massachusetts Attorney General, who's also been calling out ExxonMobil and using her leverage as the people's lawyer of Massachusetts in speaking truth to power. And so anyway, the book has lots of examples of just inspiring, creative, effective people and organizations that are doing amazing work on climate energy, but they don't necessarily define themselves that way, right? They're actually doing work on economic justice, racial justice, health and well-being, and food for all, and clean transportation issues, and transit justice, and transit equity issues, and housing for all. The idea that housing could and should be a human right, and leaders who are standing up for that. So, in writing the book, it was an opportunity for me to expand my own understanding of what's possible and what people are doing, and it's really an optimistic story of these just creative and inspiring people. So what the other piece of it is, the book was actually supposed to be completed the end of February of 2020. So I finished it pretty much and handed it in. And then I had another one last chance to kind of review everything before it was published in April. So at that point was when, it was clear when I wrote the first part, the first draft of the book, it was pre-pandemic. So I didn't know that that wasn't a piece of it. But then when I had an opportunity in April to do the last revision, it was clear that we are in this pandemic. It's going to be not a short episode. And so I was actually able to kind of not rewrite the book, but reread it and add in acknowledgement of this shift, this disruptive moment that we're in. So that actually, I didn't know, and how long, we still don't know how long we're in this for, and what all the impacts are. But I could already sense that it's again kind of a disruptive moment, which is also a time for all of us to be reevaluating, reimagining, then reinvesting and restructuring, right? So in that sense, it actually connects and provides even more resonance potentially for what I'm calling for, and what a lot of us are working toward in terms of a larger societal transformation that is hard to imagine sometimes, but at the same time, we have to work toward it, and that's kind of where we are, and it's been just personally the past few months having the opportunity to talk to people, talk to folks about the book and about some of the inspiring examples has also been really fulfilling during this, really hard time, and also anxious time for so many people. And then the political situation of the past few months, which has added additional.
Just the past few months? No, I'm just joking.
No, I know. Well, I think, yeah. So it's been quite a fulfilling experience to be able to have conversations like this with you, and thank you so much for having me on the show, and really appreciate the conversation and getting to talk about resilience with you and many other things, and building on all of your expertise and experiences, and the way you were able to synthesize so many of these things as well. It's really an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, Jenny. Dr. Stevens. And, my question about the book was partially because we during our conversation before the show, we talked about that. But also, I have leaked a couple of times that I am working on a book, and we are going to have it released in January. And right now, well, not right now, I don't plan on changing it. The title is We Are the Question and the Answer, and really reframing this idea of when we talk about systems change, that we're not just talking about an external change that needs to happen, that we are part of the system that we keep talking about. And so there's an internal part of the process that needs to happen for all of us, regardless of who we are or where we are in our learning, that it's constant and ongoing. And so I'm really excited and if I'm being completely honest, nervous about that. It's like, it's always nerve-wracking to put your baby out there, your intellectual baby out there into the world. But all of that to say, I really have enjoyed our time together. I really enjoy the conversation. I really appreciate you. Thank you for sharing the book with us. Thank you for sharing yourself with us. And for all of those who took the time on this Wednesday evening to be here with us, I want to say thank you for joining All Aces on Air. We have some amazing surprises and changes and shifts as we transition to the new year coming up to share with you. And thank you to all of the folks who have taken the time to post. If we did not get to naming you for posting, I apologize. I appreciate you as well. I hope everyone has an amazing rest of the night. And as always, sending lots of love, hope, and action to each and every one of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. And I can't wait for your book.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone who joined. Thank you.